Hello and welcome to Solutionary TV. I am your host, Dr. Tatiana. We have been excitingly sharing amazing guests, great experts that are featured on Solutionary TV that are delving deep and really giving us a fuller expression about the infinite nature of humanity and of consciousness. And tonight is no exception. Today is no exception. It doesn't matter what time of day you're watching us, we're always here. Our guest is a return guest and one that we're very fond of, and his name is Kelvin Chin. Let me tell you about Kelvin's expertise. He currently focuses on three areas of turning within. It's a type of meditation that overcomes fear of death. It's a non-religious spiritual development. He's a graduate of Dartmouth College, Yale University, and Boston College Law School. At age 19, Kelvin learned to meditate, which is young and definitely forward for him to have been that focused on his spirituality, but later began studying personally with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who taught millions how to meditate effortlessly. Kelvin taught the first meditation courses at West Point and in the United States Army in Korea. Since then, he's continued to teach an even simpler technique of his own, making it easier to learn. In his mid-20s, Kelvin spontaneously began to recall ancient memories of a century ago. One major theme consistently surfaced. No matter how eternal our minds seem to be, we tend to fall into the same recurring patterns of behavior over and over again. So Kelvin has shifted his focus away from his corporate career to helping others navigate life's often challenging waters, with the goal of improving the quality of life and offering better, more effective ways of unbundling life's thorny issues by demystifying the mystical and by teaching his clients how to turn on the opposite of the fight or flight switch. He is now also the author of Overcoming the Fear of Death and has 4 other books in the works. And there's much more that we could say. Let's just welcome Kelvin. Thank you, Kelvin Chin.
Thank you, Tatiana. Great to be here.
Great to be here with you. Sorry for stumbling over your very lengthy bio. You've got a lot of contributions that you've been providing for quite some time. And I know that when we had you on the show last time, we really kind of scratched the surface of how deeply you are able to go in not only expressing some of your personal spiritual explorations and history and others that you have done work with Maharishi and the meditation techniques and what past life and reincarnation expressions you've had, but also some of the deeper spiritual work that you're able to provide your clients. So I want to kind of open up the floor to you to pick up maybe where we left off or where you would like to go first in expressing some of the passion around this deeper work.
Sure. I've helped people on many different levels, and as you know, I take people from wherever they're at. So I have this huge range of clients who I work with, and some of them have belief systems that are kind of what you and I might refer to as more restrictive in the sense that they think of themselves as having only one life. This is
Hmm.
it. And they think that the brain and the mind are connected and that there is no continuation of the mind, spirit, soul, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, after they die.
Right.
And then I have a whole other range of clients who have a belief system that includes the idea that there's an afterlife and that the soul will continue, and that there's maybe a heaven or a state of nirvana, or depending on what their belief system is, they believe different things, and they may call it different things. And then I have another body, you could say, another group of clients who believe in reincarnation, coming back to another lifetime, and so forth.
Mhm.
So I think we could talk today a little bit more about those latter categories of folks, because from conversations that you and I've had separately, it sounds like a lot of your clients and a lot of your listeners, subscribers here are more in that latter category. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about that if that's if that makes sense for you.
Yes, I mean, we were discussing getting into the eternality of souls and really what that means. If we have more than one human life, what kind of shape and form might that take? How divergent might those different lives look and appear in terms of our race, our sex, our orientation towards self? And are we always human? Do we ever experience other realms, other forms of dimensionality? I mean, we really know that quantum physics has kind of widened the whole playing field in terms of how interdimensional we are and multidimensional we are. So let's talk about the eternality of souls and what you
Sure.
would like to share with our audience.
Sure. Yeah, like I said, there's a body of clients that I have who believe that this is it. And then I have another huge body of clients who believe that there is continuation. So let's talk about the latter. If there is continuation of the mind or soul or consciousness or spirit, or however we want to language that, um, all of those terms being synonymous the way I use them, um, then what seems to it seems to be true and accurate, at least from my own personal experience, and those friends of mine who have had experiences that are similar to mine of other lifetimes that go back. Mine go back about 6,000 years now. My memories and many of my some of my friends have memories going back that long, or maybe a couple thousand years, 1,000 years, various times, or maybe just one lifetime. Have memory of going back one lifetime, and that maybe that's only a couple of 100 years, or 100 years, or 50 years. It's a range. But
Kelvin,
the
can I
point is
stop you and
that
can you just clarify
sure,
for our listeners when you say you have the memories,
yeah,
can you go a little bit deeper with that? Explain. Are these
okay.
spontaneous memories that happen, in day to day, or is it through meditation?
Okay. So yeah, let's unbundle that a little bit. So when I say memories, yeah, they're memories just like I have memories of this lifetime. So to me, there is little difference as I've grown more and more comfortable with this, because as you said, this started happening with me 40 years ago.
Hmm.
So as I've grown more comfortable with this over the years, many years, it's no different from having a memory about what I did with my two kids, uh, last month, let's say,
Hmm.
when a couple of months ago we birthday party for me with my two kids, and so that's a memory that I have this lifetime as Kelvin Chin. These memories that I'm talking about are no different from that. That said, in other words, they are as normal and natural as that. That said, they have come to me at various times that may sound a little bit out of the norm. So, for example, to answer your question, it's happened sometimes after I've finished meditating while I'm lying down resting, which I always recommend that everybody, doesn't matter what kind of meditation technique you do, just as an aside, everybody should rest after they meditate. 5, 10 minutes,
Hmm.
15 minutes, they should lie down and rest if they can, or just sit there and rest longer after the meditation. Like I said, doesn't matter what kind of meditation you do.
Hmm.
Um, and During that period, that's when I first started having some memories. I've also had memories in my dreams, and which are different from the usual kind of kooky dreams that sometimes we all have,
Yeah.
where elephants turn into cars and stuff like that, where it's kind of a real life, a real life, viscerally, emotionally, a lot of senses involved in that kind of experience, whether it be dreams or afterwards during my meditation rest period lying down. It's happened to me in the shower when I'm just relaxing, spacing out in the shower, um, or in the bathtub. It's happened to me various times. Now it happens to me when I'm driving, if I don't have the radio on and I'm just kind of driving, paying attention to my driving, but my mind is in a more free flowing state. It happens then.
So
Now
quick,
it just
real quick,
happens.
Kelvin. Now, if you can have these kind of come upon you spontaneously like this, help our listener viewer to understand the difference between you having a real vivid imagination, taking piecemeal conversations of
Yeah.
others that you've heard, stories that you've read. What makes them deeply familiar enough that you actually can integrate them and perceive them as part of your soulful journey?
Okay, good. It's a good question. So several things on that. One is that when there's a really, really, really strong emotional component, there's a strong emotional, either sadness, happiness, it could be any emotion,
Hmm.
pain. Usually people avoid pain, but for some reason, I have a high pain threshold, or I don't have a fear of pain. And so for some reason, uh, that has been one of my memories in some of my lifetimes. So they're unpleasant memories, but most people don't have that because they're pain averse. But it can come in various emotional, strong, intense emotional experiences. That's one symptom. Another symptom is strong sensory uh,
Mhm.
strong sensory coordination or connection between the experience. So, for example, I have a memory of being in battle, for example, with a lot of dust, and I can taste the dust. I can feel the grittiness of the dust in my mouth, and so there's a very strong sensory experience that way.
Mhm.
Hunger. I've had experiences of hunger, being very, very hungry at various times, along with a vivid memory. So I'll have sometimes a visual along with a very strong sensory experience. So and to your point, to your question about how do I know it's not my imagination, which of course it possibly could be. Um, I started having experiences where I didn't where I started knowing things that I don't know about and never studied or read about
Mm.
or saw movies about as Kelvin Chin.
Right.
So I'll give you one example. So one example is I, uh, I was sitting quietly at one point and I just started this phrase just kind of coming into my mind, and it was Saracens. I didn't know what Saracens meant. I didn't know if it was a noun, a verb, an adjective. I didn't know what it was. So the words I didn't know how to spell it or whatever. But this word kept coming into my mind, Saracens, and then it was Saracens with a negative word,
Mhm.
and then I looked it up, and what I discovered was that Saracens is a term that was used both it was a name that was used for Muslims
Mhm.
before 1300 AD. So if you
Mhm.
Wikipedia this and you look up the word Saracens, Saracens, it says it's the word that was used before 1300 AD when the word Muslims was used.
Mhm.
So Muslims is a relatively new term. It's the one that we know today. But Saracens is something that Kelvin Chin did not know.
Mhm.
I had separately had, or at the same time, but previously to that, and then at the same time as having this word coming to me, I had already for years been having an experience of being in battle with the dust in my mouth on horseback, and very graphic battle battlefield experience in a very, very dusty desert type environment, and I was wearing chainmail,
Mhm.
and so chainmail with armor.
Mhm.
So it was like around 1000 AD approximately.
Mhm.
That's what it felt like anyway, and that's what I looked like. And I had red hair, red beard, long red hair, reddish beard, and I knew how big I was in the experience. I was 6'5", 6'5", 225 pounds, 230 pounds. I was big, a big Caucasian male.
Mhm.
And now, how did I know that? I don't know. I just had the knowingness for some reason of how tall I was and how big I was, and I had those experiences that I started having in my mid 20s, 40 years ago, and they've grown.
Mhm.
So I can talk a little bit more about. Let me give you a visual.
Mm.
This is a visual image I tell people when talking about past lives. If you start having past life, what you think are past life memories, and you're not sure, what I recommend that people do is take a notebook and start writing notes, or just take your smartphone and just put it in the notes section and start dictating notes about what you remember, whether it comes in a dream, whether you're in the shower, where it's during your meditation or after your meditation or whatever. And you're not sure, but start collecting these, I call them data points. And the visual image that I tell people is think of a lifetime as like 100 million piece jigsaw puzzle. So you have 100 million piece jigsaw puzzle with no box cover. So you don't have the picture of what it looks like. So you don't know exactly what this jigsaw puzzle is going to look like. But you start getting these little pieces. And so the analogy is like maybe I get 5 or 10 pieces and they fit together. It's like, wow, you know, and then maybe I get another 20 or 25 pieces and they fit together. I go, whoa. But
Mhm.
those 20 pieces don't fit with the first 5 pieces that I got that fit together.
Right. Right.
And they're a very small part of this 100 million or billion piece jigsaw puzzle
Mm-hmm.
that I don't even know what it looks like. But I start piecing these things together. And so I've collected about 20 something of those
Mm-hmm.
jigsaw puzzles now. And I have maybe somewhere just analogously, I have some jigsaw puzzles that maybe only have 50 pieces in them. I have a couple of jigsaw puzzles, two or three, that may have 300,000 or 100,000 jigsaw puzzle pieces. But it's a small part out of the 100 million or billion pieces still.
Right, right. And this
But
is
it's
the
a lot,
mosaic that is
and they
you.
fit together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the soulful mosaic that is Kelvin Chin, that is the soul, that is the eternal soul of Kelvin Chin. And I think that there's been so much study, Kelvin, that's been done on the veracity of the potential of reincarnation. I mean, we have children that have been born very awake, very lucid, with memories that were perfectly clear, and were able to revisit the very homes, the very towns, the very families, going into the very homes and tell them where money was hidden under the table, under floorboards. Re-met their own children or grandchildren. I mean, there's been some phenomenal studies. Anyone that wants to look it up. I think what is fabulous about your sharing is, why would we choose it? If we are
Yeah,
a mosaic of personalities and soulful expressions in various incarnations and bodies, I know you have a lot of wisdom on this topic. Why would we choose to come back again and again and
sure.
continue to build on that mosaic? And why would it be important for you to recall some of those past soulful memories as Kelvin? How is that contributing towards your life now?
Right. So let me just make a reference to your first point, and I'll answer the personal question in a sec. So there are tens of thousands of documented cases, and at least about 2,500 to 3,000 of them are documented at the University of Virginia Medical School. So people can go online and they can Google University of Virginia Medical School uh, children's past lives, and they've done studies there, and I talk about it in my book, Overcoming the Fear of Death. So, which you can check out on Amazon, and you can read part of it on my website for free if you want, or listen to part of it for free. I do the narration, but there's studies that have been done since the 1960s worldwide. Now 2,500 to 3,000 of those. So you can read those 2 to 5 year old kids, just like you said.
Mm-hmm.
No, they live in Louisiana, but they remember being in India or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then the doctors at the University of Virginia Medical School fly to India, to that village, and talk to people who remember when this 15-year-old Indian boy was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And now the kid's in, I don't know, Kentucky or whatever, in the United States, and he's 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so people can research that themselves. To your point, why do we keep coming back? I think that, first of all, that what if we're not eternal, we're very, very old. And I think logic argues that we are eternal, and that's a whole other discussion. But so why do we come back? Why would we come back? Um, I would think I come back. I can tell you from my personal experience, and I can extrapolate from that, from talking to other people, why they remember coming back. I think we come back for a number of different reasons, and there could be many different reasons why people could come back. They could come back because they have relationships that they want to revisit.
Mm-hmm.
They may have relationships, personal relationships, is what I'm talking about. Some maybe family or friends. Maybe I was the wife of somebody before, and now I want to come back as the husband. Or maybe I was a friend with somebody before, and now I want to come back as their child. There's all these different types of relationships that are interwoven, and that they're not gender specific,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not socioeconomic or any other category specific. It's all up to the free will or the choice of that individual mind or soul or consciousness to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And other reasons we may come back is maybe we have some work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we're doing some spiritual work. So I have memories of doing spiritual work for many thousands of years, off and on, in various roles. And then I've taken a break and not done it, and I've done it in other ways, in kind of moved my personality objectives, so to speak, you could call them, forward in different ways. So it's not always been in a spiritual capacity that you and I might define that way. But my personality is pretty much the same.
Hmm.
So that personality, those personality traits that Kelvin Chin has had over the last 6,000 years that I can recall, there are certain key personality traits that have continued. And yes, is it possible to change? Absolutely. But I say those personality traits that each of us has, if they do change, and if we do want them to change, they change very, very slowly over
Hmm.
many, many lifetimes, I would say, is my experience. So I don't know if that kind of covers some
It
range.
does. It
Yeah,
does because you made a point that there are patterns that you've been able to witness in your meditative work and in your spiritual journey that are reoccurring from lifetime after lifetime. Let's talk about the relevance as to why spontaneous memories or even meditative induced memories that pick up on some of those incarnations that we've had that are part of our total mosaic. What do you think it is that makes them show up at different times of your life, different aspects of your maturity, and how are they lending to the growth of the apparent moment that they are inserting themselves, Kelvin?
sure. So I think that there's two things on this to point out. I think one is that there's no one reason why anything could show up at any particular time in one's lifetime, why you could remember something. There could be many, many reasons, right?
Hmm.
There could be, it could be because you have a suppressed memory about something, and by recurring that, by bringing that memory up again, and it becoming a recurring memory for you, it may help you release something
Hmm.
and free yourself up from that. And other times it may be a reminder of a relationship that you have with somebody that may give you some insight that might help you with that relationship that you have with them now in this lifetime.
Hmm.
And so it may be a memory that, oh, wow, I have had issues with that person in this way or that way in the past. And maybe that's why when we get together now, there is this certain dynamic that occurs. And maybe that will inform me now, as Kelvin Chin,
Hmm.
to help improve that relationship,
Yeah.
or at least improve my understanding of it if the relationship may be no longer,
Hmm.
because we may have severed that relationship for various reasons prior to this memory coming up. So there are a lot of different reasons that could inform us. But my thing is always, what practical value can I take from that memory that may help inform Kelvin Chin now, because that's who I am now.
Hmm.
And so yes, there are certain personality traits that I think I have that have recurred over many lifetimes, over many, many thousands of years. That said, I'm living now,
Right. Right.
always in the continual present that we live. And that's what's important. It's not about cocktail party. Oh, I remember this and that. Who cares? I said, it's about how does that inform me about knowing myself better now? Because
Hmm.
that's what's going to help me going forward
Hmm.
in my lifetime or lifetimes plural.
Right. There's a lot of pull right now in the guests that we brought on the show in a general theme of integration. How we don't recognize in all of humanity's diversity and our inability to get along with one another and our struggles in separateness, that we get a lot more clear that both science and esoteric philosophy and wisdom has been saying the same thing now more than ever, that we are an integrated species, that humanity is one, that from a perspective that is very hierarchical and spiritual, we're actually one sentient being. But let's talk about why we come into these bodies and what kind of agreements we make to help us as we further differentiate ourselves from our parents and from our family members and from the rest of society. What is it that these agreements that we make, as you and I have discussed prior and is really relevant to the show, coming into these bodies with other souls that we've, again, maybe soul contracted with and said, hey, I'm going to play this role, you play this role. Why do we do these agreements? Why do we move away from oneness and into segregation and into characters and little random egos to fulfill these agreements, quote unquote? What would be the point of that, Kelvin?
Well, my thing is that why wouldn't we do that? I take a reverse view of that because that's how we can actualize. That's how we can execute. That's where we live. We live in the playing field of life, right? And so life is about individuation. It's about individuality. It's about making choices. And so let's go back for a second. so I remember I have recollections on the other side, so I don't just have past life memories. I have recollections on the other side. I have communications, as you and I have discussed separately offline. I have regular communications with people I know on the other side, people I don't know, people who've been in physical form on this side, and people who have, or minds, not people, minds, souls, consciousnesses who have been not in physical form on this side as we know it. So I have this ongoing connection, you could say, these conversations that are normal and natural that have been going on for many, many, many decades. That said, even with those friends on the other side, I have conversations and I give them my input. They take that input, and sometimes they adopt that input that I give them, and sometimes they don't. So my thing is, we have free will all the time. We are individual minds, and we need to share our input on both sides of the veil, so to speak. Um, but we can come back to this. To your point, in terms of the friends we may have, who we may choose and may say choose to say, hey, Tatiana, let's get together on the other side and let's do some work together. Mm-hmm. So maybe you and I had that conversation. Let's just assume that for the case, just for sake of conversation, you as an example for folks. But then what happens is, and maybe we say on the other side, Tatiana, let's get together in junior high school and start hanging out and spend some time together and get and then start doing some stuff together. And let's do some spiritual stuff together when we're real young. Yeah. Okay. So, but then what happens? What happens is your parents and my parents make other decisions. And then all of a sudden, we're not living in the same town like we originally planned before we were born, you and I. And our parents make other decisions because there are other minds involved here, their mind, their free will is operating. And then my father's engineering companies, bosses' minds are involved, and then they relocate him to wherever. And then you and I are not, all of a sudden, we're never in the same city. And then your parents decide to go religiously a certain way, which you didn't anticipate going in. You knew they were open to certain things, and you went to those parents because they were open certain ways, but you didn't know that they were going to go that way. They went that way, and that took you in a different direction. And now, decades later, you and I get back together again because there's a draw, there's a pull, there's probably some pre-agreed upon conversation that we had, but other people's minds come into play, and so nothing is guaranteed. Right?
Yeah.
But we do this. Why? Because you and I have a connection. We have a deep connection from who knows when, how old, how many lifetimes ago, we don't know. But there's a connection there. And we also are doing similar work. So there's a synergism there. Right?
Love it. I love that analogy. So for our viewers, helping them to understand that there's a very big difference between destiny, fate, and maybe soulful agreements that we have before we choose to incarnate. That free, I think, in my experience in the work that I do, and Kelvin, please chime in and let me know if you can corroborate this, is that we may come with soul contracts where we had a particular person that was going to be an intimate relationship that might have turned into a marriage that might have had children. And maybe we were going to have up to 5 children, and maybe we were going to live in a certain part of the world. But at any given time in the multiverses and in the iterations that exist that we're living in this one particular co-creative field, we can make choices on the fly. We can make really powerful choices that through free will override that decision. And maybe there's an iteration of us somewhere else in the multiverses playing with quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and quantum computing that says there is an infinite amount of, multiverses that have us making other choices. But in this one in particular, our free will is paramount. So we can dodge instead of engage. And we can hang around a little bit longer with a relationship, or we can cut out and experience something completely random and brand new. Does that sound succinct to you?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way of summarizing it and reframing it in a different way. And I would add to that, to the point that I started to go off on before, where communications with folks on the other side, whoever they are, friends, people we know, people we don't know, people who are just interested in our perspective on things as we may be interested in their perspective, whether they have a body this time or not, right? We're all having conversation, and whether we're consciously aware of sometimes them eavesdropping in on our conversations, that is happening.
Mhm.
And so, and conversely, what we are saying and doing here uh, can have influence in other places, not just on planet Earth,
Mhm.
and not just even in the other afterlife area, whatever we want to call that,
Mhm.
but it could be having influence on other planets, for example, or
Right.
other dimensions, whatever. Kind of alluding to what you were referencing what you were just alluding to there.
Right.
So I think while that's interesting, and I think it's probably, who knows, I think it's probably factually accurate. I know for a fact that I have influenced conversations that I've had with people on the other side who I know,
Mhm.
because for example, with the 30th November event that you're aware of, that I helped organize a couple in 2014.
Right.
Uh, the video is online. People can check it out. 30thnovember.com, 30th November. But with that whole event that I organized, I was having ongoing conversations with folks on the other side who were asking for that event to take place, so that they could unfold a little bit more, let people behind the curtain a little bit more about the spiritual history of the planet, at least from that group's perspective,
Mhm.
okay, on the planet over the last 5 to 10,000 years. But my point is that using that as an illustration, I was having ongoing conversations with them where I'd say, you know what, I don't know about that. I think including that in the discussion might be a little too much, or maybe we should say it this way or that way. And they took that into account, and it was adjusted. Uh,
Wow.
so I'm just saying this so that to kind of underscore another point I like to make, which is don't just take everything that comes from the other side at face value being
Yes.
accurate and appropriate for you, because
Yes.
you are the ultimate decision maker of your life always,
Mhm.
whether it's on this side or the other side. And I have a funny story I'll tell you that somebody told me recently about a near-death experience that he had, but which underscores what we're talking about. Uh, you're the ultimate decision maker, and so give input when you're having conversation. Make it a conversation. Don't just make it a, oh, they told me this, and therefore I do got to do that.
Right, right. And you know what? Let's elaborate on that real quick because
Yeah,
with all of the internet, television, and YouTube and BitChute and all these great ways that we have, these communication tools, just like the show here, we've got a lot of people that are coming on as way showers, and many of them are channels. And I
yes,
have my own feelings about channeling that kind of marries really well into your last statement, which is and I think NDAers have commented on this before. I know that when we had Curtis Childs with Swedenborg Foundation on several months ago, we got into what exists in that dark energy or that dark matter that makes up over 95% of what the universe is actually made of. We're relegated in this physical world to 4.7% of what can be seen through, human visual acuity, which leaves a whole lot of um, intelligent and active and probably very voluminous experience and reality in that dark field that's either dark matter or dark energy, that 95%. And what the comment was, and I want you to feed into this and give us your feeling, we would no more take the advice of a random stranger walking down the street than we would to simply trust that because it isn't something we can see and because we can't corroborate and chase it down and see what kind of living environment it's in and from what point of origin it comes from and where its intelligence is, and get references for it. Simply because we don't see it, it makes it angelic, it makes it worth listening to and following, its free will upon us or its suggestions to us. I'm sure you've got some feedback on that. With all the channels out there, we really do need to be using a
right,
high level of discernment, right, Kelvin?
absolutely, and including the channels themselves. I would say if there's anybody who's listening who is a channel themselves, I've been through that. So that started spontaneously happening to me. It's like 30 over 30 years ago now. And so I angels, Archangel Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, Raphael, all of them, and then a whole bunch of other angelic, um, we'll just say angelic types were coming to me, and I was getting information and so forth, and to the point where I was transcribing it, I was taping it. This was in the 80s, 1980s. And I remember I went to a bookstore. It doesn't exist anymore in Los Angeles. Those you probably have heard of the Bodhi Tree
Oh,
bookstore,
yes, very
which is like
well.
a famous bookstore, which is now unfortunately it's no longer. Uh, but I walked into the Bodhi Tree bookstore looking for a specific book that somebody had suggested that I get. I went in, and it was Bodhi Tree bookstore. For those people who don't know, was just basically a house with a bunch of rooms that became a bookstore. And so I walked into the back room where a bunch of books, and I randomly pulled a book off the bookshelf, and I randomly opened it up to page, I don't know what, 30 something, and I started reading stuff that I had channeled from these angelic types and so forth, so on. Anyway, I was like, I just 2 weeks ago, I just got this information, transcribed it. So that I got chills, and I was like, oh, because I was wondering, am I making this up or whatever? Anyway, so I started relaxing and opening up to that. But my point is that I started thinking about this from a different perspective. I didn't just take what they told me at face value. I took it and I thought about it. And then I thought, okay, is this really coming from them and so forth? And even if it is it valuable to me right now? And
Right.
what I decided at that time is it wasn't immediately relevant for me in my life as Kelvin Chin right then.
Mm-hmm.
I went through this went on for 2 or 3 years, so it wasn't like an overnight decision. But since then, I've had many other conversations with many other types. So not just angelic types, others and so forth on the other side. And the bottom line is, I tell people to think about it this way: if your grandmother died and she's been trying to fix you up with certain people to marry before she died, after she dies, and she starts coming to you in the form of some name that she's made up that's not grandmother, and she's trying to give you advice about who you should marry. Why should you listen to her now that she doesn't have a body, and when you weren't listening to her when she did have a body?
That's
It's
a
the same,
really great point.
right? It could be the same mind. How do you know? So it's like, so think of the grandmother story. That's what I tell people, and it's like,
Ah,
it's like you always have to make your own decision. It doesn't matter, because it's your life.
right.
That's bottom line all the time.
Now, you had a point you wanted to make that corroborated with an NDE that's been reported. Do you want to
Yes.
touch on that one
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. Thank you. So what happened with this person died, had a near-death experience. People probably know that acronym NDE, near-death experience.
Absolutely.
So the person died. The person was in the hospital, died on the operating table or something, wherever it was. I don't know the medical details, but on this one, but he died. He finds himself on the other side in this kind of lit up area, so to speak. No physical objects around, but two physical forms. So two physical forms. One is a woman, a female, in a light body, like lit up, like bright light, in like a long robe kind of thing, but a female form, lit up. And the other is what he calls his guru, his spiritual teacher, who had died. And so the two of them on the other side are basically trying to convince him of their different positions. And so the woman in the who looks like an angelic form, but it was a physical form, woman, female, is saying, no, come with me. Your time is up. Come to the light with me. And his spiritual teacher, guru, is saying, no. You go back. You still have work to do. Go back, go back, go back. So it's basically this little debate going on, and it's like a push-pull thing going on. He's
Wow.
having an NDE. He's on the other side. And so what happened was he obviously chose to follow his guru's advice, and he came back. And now he's telling this story.
Wow.
So it's a great little story that shows that you have to make the decision. don't listen to anybody who's talking to you on the other side. And the one who's got the light body form may not be the one that you want to listen to, but it's up to you. You could listen to him or not.
Well, let's bring this up into, March of 2018. There is tremendous, I would say overwhelming, compelling, unquestionable evidence that we're going through a major shift in human evolution, that we are experiencing a time where technology could take us in one direction that looks like a humanity that's a little bit transhumanistic, and it's a lot of AI. And quite honestly, it's not a direction that I'm choosing to head out on. It's not one that I'm supporting, and I'm not co-creating that reality. I'm aware that it's being co-created by others, but it's not mine. What appears to be really evident, both in a cosmic way, in the trajectory of the solar system and the Earth going around the Milky Way galaxy, in the great year that we've talked about on the shows before, and in the ascension of the Earth, because she has her own cycles, and the understanding both in esoteric spirituality and ancient scripture and writ, that we know that there is a cycle with which we move through dimensionality, and the Earth is maybe moving into a fourth dimension, fifth dimension, and that we move with it, or we can choose to move with it. Where do you see the relevance in this time for discernment, Kelvin? How do we help our audience listeners to kind of get more of a firm grasp and handle on why is it important to know that you've lived multiple lifetimes? Why is it important to remember some of it? And why would integration of the full soulful picture that you are be important? And how do we use that going forward? How does that become a skill set so that we really have a better command of our free agency?
Yeah. So at first I think the first thing is all of this is geared towards what? Reducing our fears. Reducing our fears about mortality, death, or even fears about what may happen after we die. So it's all about reducing fears, because if we reduce our fears, that frees up our mind. There's more freedom of our consciousness. There's more creativity. There's higher probability that in our free will we're going to make more appropriate, better life choices for ourselves going forward. So that's always number one. And the other thing is that part and parcel of that is, well, I have had memories living on other planets too. So, I mean, I have some, this is in one of my books that I'm going to get into. And so those memories are not as vivid as the one, I mean, I have some, they're vivid, but they're not as many memories because most of my lives have been here. And I think that that's typical because we tend to go back to where we're familiar. And why start from square zero again, as opposed to pick up kind of where you left off. You kind of know what gravity is like. You kind of know what human beings are like, how they think. It's over. Like why start all over again in a whole different life form? But it's possible. And so my point of saying that is that I don't have a fear. I hope that the Earth doesn't blow itself up. But if it did, I don't have a fear about that either. I'm just going to an extreme because I know there are people who are worried about that. And because my mind, as far as my experience and many of my friends who've had similar experiences are concerned, seems to be eternal. It logically is eternal. It's very, very old anyway, been around a long time. And so there's nothing that indicates to me that I won't continue. And therefore, and that I have free will, that I've made choices. I was an eagle. I've been an animal. To your earlier question about being an animal, yes, I have memories being an animal, and I've been on other planets and so forth, but mostly been here. And yet the personality has pretty much been the same throughout. Little minor tweakings here and there, as over long periods of time, but I don't have a fear of that. That said, of annihilation of the Earth. That said, I'm doing whatever I can to help promote life on this planet in as healthy a way as I can, because why do I do that? I do that because emotionally it makes me happy. It feeds me. It may not feed other people as much as it does me, and so they will make other choices. So people should not feel guilty about not doing what you and I may choose to do
Mm-hmm.
in the spiritual way because they're wired differently. Then they should do something else. People should follow their passions and do what they feel comfortable doing or what they need to do to feed their family. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they do something that's not fully their passion, but their passion at that point of their family supersedes their passion for doing a certain type of work that's not going to support the passion of feeding and supporting and raising a family.
Mm-hmm.
So people have different passions, they change. I'm a big supporter of people on an emotional level, at least, following what feeds them at that time, and then making choices and changing as they go through life. But it needs to be fear free. That's my bottom line. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Well, and when you turn within, and let's talk about that, what does that enable? What does that empower in us to be able to make relevance and purpose out of our lives? Because, like you said, not everyone needs to, hack the next, adventure code. Not everybody needs to be a master maestro. Not everybody needs to be, internationally famous, and some just really want to cultivate the love, the warmth, the relationships, the stability, and the divine as them, in them as them, is enjoying that experience too. But I do think that universally applying this methodology that we're talking about, this philosophy around knowing oneself, that meditation or turning within is going to always bring a roundedness and always bring a sense of returning to oneself in a really important dynamic. Let's talk about the turning within that you work with your clients on, Kelvin.
right, right. So that's great. So there's, I would say, what more personal, what more intimate thing can you do? Can you choose to do for yourself other than turning within in an effortless way? Turning within, and therefore, as you said, knowing oneself a little bit more. And I would argue that if our mind, our consciousness, our spirit, our soul is eternal, then we never ever, there's not an end point. That's what eternal means. Then we never ever know ourselves fully, but we improve our knowledge about ourselves a
Mm-hmm.
little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
so what does that do? I'm a pragmatist, so I look at things from a practical standpoint. So what does that do? That improves our ability to do things that are going to be helpful and practical and useful, and therefore for ourselves, and therefore make ourselves more happy,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what it's all about. And so that, to me, that is, if we drill down and say what's my life purpose, that is my life purpose. That my life purpose is to be happy. Now, how I articulate that, what do I choose? As you know, my career, I've taught meditation full time. Now I'm teaching it full time again and doing the spiritual work again. But in between, I sold life insurance. I was in a law firm as a working in as a law firm for a while, and then I was in law firms, running law firms, and did business development in business. I was a CEO of a startup. I did a lot of different things along the way, and but yet all the time, every single time I was doing any of those externally different manifestations of myself, it was feeding myself by knowing a little bit more about myself through those different filters that
Mm-hmm.
I chose,
Mm-hmm.
jobs, careers, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I encourage people to do, is to look at their life more through this filtration mode. But ultimately, it's about knowing ourselves, and all of those choices we make throughout our life can inform us about ourselves in a slightly different way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes life rich,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what makes us more intimate, as I said at the outset, with ourselves. It develops a closeness, a love, and an intimacy for oneself as we know ourselves so much better. And as you said, how do we do that? Turning within, I think, is critical. By closing our eyes regularly and meditating, I do it twice a day. My clients do it twice a day, 10 to 15 minutes, and it's an effortless process.
Hmm.
But I recommend any effortless process. Now, whether you do, they learn from me, or they take my classes, or whether they take somebody else's classes. It doesn't matter to me in terms of my spiritual teacher work. I'm about moving the whole thing forward in a positive direction as much as possible. But I'm a big proponent of as easy and effortless as possible, not concentration, not focusing the mind, not manipulating the mind, and not clearing the mind,
Hmm.
because those are not effective turning within techniques.
Hmm.
So any other technique that somebody may choose that's easy and effortless, that's great. And that will help move them forward in this way that we're talking about. But increasing their knowledge, by increasing their knowledge of themselves, feeling more self-confident inside, developing more creativity, developing more ability to think incisively, clearly and rationally, and not and to under and also it will increase our ability to understand our emotional patterns better,
Hmm.
which, as you said at the outset,
Hmm.
we tend to fall into patterns over and over again, and sometimes they may not be healthy. So it will help us get out of these unhealthy patterns and get into more healthy patterns.
Wonderful. So, what I'm hearing you say is every life is relevant, and all choices are relevant. I mean, it's clearly a free will universe. You can, with only the hindrance of law or natural repercussions, we can pretty much try or attempt to make the choices to do, to become, to experience anything, even the really hyper destructive choices. We know this. We've been students of
Exactly.
history, both unintentionally as well as intentionally. So knowing that all choices are relevant, knowing that free will reigns supreme, knowing that living a life that is one that is highly reflective from turning within can be so empowering because you really feel like you're having a full and a rich and a deep tapestry of a life. And it's also one that you feel empowered in rather than feel victimized in.
Yeah.
Stepping outside of the cycles of self sabotage. Carolyn Mason, Medical Intuition, talks about, the four archetypes that, regardless of where you are on the planet, any one of us can feel or embody or start to imprint on, which is to be the child, the victim, the saboteur, the prostitute. We're all capable of being children or being childlike in our lives and our irresponsible attitudes towards things. We're all capable of feeling like a victim because we've all been misunderstood. And we know that we can all sabotage even the best things that we're moving towards because it's outside our comfort zone. And at one point or another, all of us can be bought. Sometimes people don't mind, having their morality compromised over something small that's financial, but for others, we can be bought if you've got a gun to our head or someone that we care about. So we look at these archetypes and we realize that they exist in humanity for a reason. If we were all turning within, if we were all seeing the passion, the purpose, and the relevance to our lives, let's talk about, in just the last few minutes that we have, Kelvin, what this does for humanity. We can know what it does for ourselves, but when we've got all this diversity and we've also got all this derision going on right now, if we could really implement and make this a daily practice on an individual level that builds into familial and maybe neighborhoods, cultures, tribes, states, countries, and make it a global thing, what would this kind of a shift do for us?
So here's the thing. I'll give you because I know we don't have a lot of time, because this is a whole other session. But um, basically, because what in one word, what you're describing is the democratization of of human behavior in a sense. Okay, but let me. So in other words, free will, choice. But what would happen if everybody really did recognize that they have free will and complete 100% choice? Um, Let me back up for 1 second. When we're talking about free will, we're talking about choice, but from a spiritual standpoint, I want to insert this point that somebody does something that's hurtful for somebody, there is a consequence. But there's no spiritual judgment that occurs about the person's quote unquote bad behavior. So there's two different things that are going on there. And I don't know if we want to get into that now, but I just want to put that out there so that if people understand what I'm talking about, it relieves them of feeling guilty.
We've got a
But
whole show we're going to do on that one in the future, Kelvin. I think that is worth
yeah,
exploring later for sure.
yeah, okay. But to your question, I think what would happen would be a lot more freedom of people thinking and in their behavior and their actions if we followed the course that you proposed. Um, Initially, it might be a little bit chaotic, to be honest, because most people aren't used to that.
Yeah.
But this is going to be an incremental thing anyway, so it wouldn't be. But I'm just saying, if it was overnight, then it would be quite chaotic because people aren't used to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but incrementally, there would be less cruelty because why are people cruel? Why do they do bad behavior like that? They do it because their sense of self-esteem or self-confidence is low, and they have a low sense of self, and so they try to make other people around them lower than they are so that they feel better. So I call
Right.
it the importance of being important. There's an overriding importance of them being important, so they take everybody else and they lower their importance, they make them feel worse, and that's why bullying happens,
Mm-hmm.
basically, in a
Mm-hmm.
nutshell.
Yes.
So if we followed your proposal, there would be less and less bullying because people would start to have more of an aha experience to realize that their bullying was actually not helpful for them because they're surrounding themselves with weaker and weaker people.
Hmm.
And their need for bullying would dissipate because they would start feeling better and better about themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like a really wonderful recipe to solve all the great ills that humanity is experiencing. If we could be less disassociative about ourselves, how we play a role in importance, first of all, in our own sphere of reference, within our own perception of self, more integrative, less casting our shadows left and right and disassociating even from our own negative thoughts, our own habituated patterns of behavior, some of the symptomology that we experience in our lives that is cyclical because we're unwilling to look at it. If we became more integrated, turning within, experiencing these meditative techniques, recognizing that our free will is here, but that we can be making choices that are much more powerful, much more joyful, and quite honestly, worth leaving a legacy behind. It really almost solves from a microcosm outward. It rolls out like a beautiful healing of the macrocosm, doesn't it, Kelvin?
Yeah, and I think that it really opens up our universe of possible experience and how we may manifest that even in physical structures, uh,
Mm-hmm.
hugely. It would
Mm-hmm.
just open up the creativity to amazing things. So yeah, this is something that, well, I'll just share something as we're leaving, that I've been told from the other side that there's an excitement about this possibility, and there are hundreds of souls who have chosen not to come back because things are so messed up here. I'll just use that term. That they are encouraged, and that they'll be coming back in the next uh, 300 to 500 years, 100 to 500 years in the near future. In other words, some of the what we know as the great geniuses of the world, the Leonardo da Vinci's of the world, and so forth, are lining up and having conversations about when to come back.
Mm-hmm. Let's direct our audience to where they can learn a little bit more about your work, Kelvin, since we're right here on the hour. I think that this has been a great sharing so far, but we want to continue it. Tell them about your websites and some of the work that you're doing.
Sure. So on any of my websites, you can go to the bottom of any page and they will connect to the other three websites. I have four websites. And if you want to go and look at my books, I have 5 books. That's kelvinhenrychin.com. And then probably the other one to go to is turningwithin.org, is my meditation website. But like I said, I have overcomingthefearofdeath.org, is we're dealing with death and dying. And my more spiritually oriented website is just kelvinchin.org. So I
Okay.
have 3 nonprofits websites there, if I'm counting correctly, and I have my book website, which is kelvinhenrychin.com, and there's a synopsis of each of the 5 books there. One of which, as you know, is out, was published in 2016. Overcoming the Fear of Death is the title.
Thank you,
thank you.
Kelvin. You've got a wealth of support services and beautiful reading material and really inspired words for our viewing audience. I really do encourage you guys to take a look at Kelvin's work. We will probably have him on again. He's a repeat guest. He just continues to deepen the conversation. Having just left Kelvin, Rhythmia, and speaking to Gerald Powell, who actually experienced being in the hundreds of millions, a multimillionaire, and realizing that with all that acquisition, with all of the fame, with all of the celebrity lifestyle, with access to anything that he wanted, he was miserable because there really is a quality of self-love that comes from turning within that none of us can avoid. There is no amount of external acquisition that is going to bring us joy and a sustainable sense of contentment. And very often, if we aren't looking at ourselves, then we really don't know how we're showing up in our relationships. And one of the greatest gifts he gave the world was to take his going within moment, using his meditative process and his journeying and working with Beyond That Veil to be able to realize this is what's going to heal potentially anyone and everyone that's ready to make this kind of a shift in their lives. And I'm deeply grateful for him. I came back a more integrated person myself. I do a lot of work on myself, and I don't think the journey ends. As long as we're still in the flesh and we're here, it's definitely part of our journey. So returning to wholeness is the key. I want to thank Kelvin for joining us tonight, and I want to tell our guests there is a changing of the tides. We are not what materialistic science has told us that we are. We are so much more. We're so much more, and there is so much that we are yet to experience. It's time to get ready for the big show. Human evolution is upon us, and I'm excited about it. Take a look at Solutionary TV and see how else we can serve you with some of the amazing guests that have been on the show, some of the books that have been made available from past guests as well as myself. And remember that together, we are the solution.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.